Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Rebellion's Edge podcast, episode 4. We're going to be talking about Eastern and Western differences in gaming, but I'd like to start out with my small cast here today, and that is Mr. Bao Double Dom, which is the first co-host of the TCP. Bao Double Dom, introduce yourself, good sir.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, really small cast today. It's kind of surprising. I think this is the smallest we've had so far.
Well, as long as we get all the info out there that we need to and all our opinions, I think we can still have a pretty good podcast. So next up we have Mr. Drillbit.
Oh, hey everybody. Yeah, despite the small cast, I think we can still have a great conversation since I do have a lot to say about this particular topic.
And Brendan, I think he's going to be running late, but when he gets in here, we'll let him introduce himself. So we're going to start off on the first question, which is, let's begin our personal experiences on differences between Eastern and Western gaming. What games, styles, influences do you gravitate towards the most between Japanese and Western developers? Who wants to take this first?
I will take it first then, I guess.
Go ahead.
So from personal experience, I think growing up, I've had more of an experience with Eastern devs as opposed to Western devs. I mean, I've played some Western games, but most of the games that I kind of grew up around, they were all like from the East. So I kind of developed like a taste for it as I was growing up for like Eastern specific games. Like as far as like what games, what game styles per se, definitely like anything like feudal Japan style, I guess, or like if it's very action oriented, I will generally go for that, especially if it's like really over the top and crazy. With Western devs, it's kind of hard to say because I don't play many Western games per se. But I guess the stuff that I really like is just kind of like the goofy looking like platformers, like kind of like the original Jack and Dexter or like Crash Bandicoot, for example.
All right. Do you want someone to go next, or you're done?
Yeah, somebody could go next, unless if there's more that you want me to say, because I can keep going.
No, I think I can go next. So I started off with both, really, like, especially in the PS1 days. It was a lot about platforming. They were pretty much neck and neck for Eastern and Western developers. So I got an affinity for stuff like Crash Bandicoot and Jack, and for Eastern developers, I got into stuff like Castlevania, Symphony of the Night. I thought those were really good platformers back in the day, Mega Man X4. So I have an affinity for both. I would say that when it comes to Eastern game developers, they definitely have a lot of creativity on their hands when it comes to video games. Western, in this day and age, I will say that the variety is wearing a little bit thin, but I'm going to get into that in later questions. But that's how I feel about my current status on them currently. So I love both, actually. I think, like, if you just go and look, you will see a lot of good games in either region, whether you love Eastern games or Western. So that's how I feel. So Drillbit, how about you?
For me, it's mainly half and half. I grew up with a Super Nintendo, so I mainly just played all of the first-party titles and even and the ones from Capcom or Konami. Though over time I did start to like delve into more Western style games, especially with like PlayStation 2 and even the PlayStation 3. So both, I guess both types of developers have their pros and cons, but for the most part, I do enjoy both of them. Though I would gravitate towards Eastern devs more.
All right, so we're gonna move on to the second question here. So we're gonna have Dom read that one off. Could you read that one off, please?
Yeah, name your favorite Eastern and Western video game studios. I guess for me, this is gonna be kind of mixed because it's changed over time. Like if you were to ask me, like I want to say like maybe 8 or more so years ago when I was younger, like what devs I really liked. Um, Capcom would be on that list. but these days I don't think I could really say they're my favorite anymore, just because of how they've been over the last several years. Honestly, they've kind of gotten to that point where I'm just like, I can't really say I'm excited or looking forward to anything they do these days. But if we're talking about like early 2000s and 90s Capcom, then yeah, definitely that would be my favorite. But some of the other ones that I really started to kind of grow into a little more is like Sega, for example. I really enjoy some of the stuff that they've gotten. Um, From Software is another Eastern developer studio that I've been kind of interested in lately, especially since I've been recently introduced to the Dark Souls games and whatnot. And I'm trying to think. Uh, I get. Can we count Kojima Productions as like a studio then? I guess because, I mean, whether it be old or new Kojima Productions, I think they have a lot of talent on board.
Yes, they count. They count.
So, yeah, like especially with like Hideo Kojima on board and whatnot. Yeah, just a lot of interesting stuff. And then, damn, like there are so many that I could like pick and choose from. But yeah, I guess we'll go with those three just to kind of keep it short. And then for like Western devs, Naughty Dog is all right. I would say they're not too bad. I would say maybe trying to think, because there are a couple of ones that I know of, but like you can tell, like I don't really play a lot of Eastern, or I'm sorry, not Eastern, Western games, because I'm more familiar with Eastern stuff.
I'm surprised you didn't say anything about Siege.
See, oh, well, okay. The small portion at Ubisoft that actually has talent and can make something good, the development studio that worked on Rainbow Six Siege, great fucking game, by the way. I would highly recommend it. So Ubisoft, to some degree, whenever they do actually make a good title, or like if they when they did Blood Dragon, Far Cry Blood Dragon, shit. I guess we can say older Activision as well. Activision used to like publish a lot of really kick-ass games back in the day, but you know, that's not Activision these days. And maybe a little bit of Bethesda as well. So those would be my picks.
Okay, so I have a few. I would say if we're going back in the day, then it would have to be Capcom, no doubt. I think during that era of the PS1, they just pumped out gold after gold after gold. It was insane. It's absurd how they fell from grace. And Konami is pretty much the same. They had a lot of really good exclusives back in the day that you could appreciate, like Metal Gear, Castlevania, a lot of good things. But now they sort of fell from grace. So the developers that I like the most are basically, you know, Naughty Dog. I love their work. I love Rockstar. I used to love Midway as well back in the day. They were very good as an American developer. They really pumped out some quality games like Mortal Kombat, The Suffering. I really enjoyed those too. I'm trying to think of more Eastern developers here. I will say FromSoft, definitely really good. I really love Bloodborne and Dark Souls, so those games can rank up there really high. And then just stuff that the studios that Sony does with their little developers that are Eastern. I really enjoyed, what is it, Shadow of the Colossus, you know, that team. And then there's probably some other teams as well that's like off the top of my head right now, but I cannot name for some reason. So I will say some of those would be pretty good for me. So what about you, Mr. Drillbit?
Well, if you were to ask me in the early 2000s, my favorite Eastern ones would have been Capcom and Konami, mainly because Konami created probably one of the greatest horror series ever made, which was the Silent Hill games. You had 4 amazing titles, and then after that, quality started to drop, and then especially with like the recent cancellation of Silent Hills, pretty much sealed its fate. And because of all the shady stuff that's been going on with Konami and Kojima, I don't really like them that much now. And Capcom's quality and Capcom kind of suffers the same from what Konami is, except with them ignoring so many franchises now and only sticking to like the big ones like Resident Evil or Monster Hunter. So I guess in terms of my favorite modern Eastern developers, probably would be From Software. Though the funny thing is that I actually knew about them before. I actually knew about them because of the Armored Core games, which Miyazaki actually worked on. So that was pretty interesting when I found out he was going to work on something like Dark Souls.
Yeah, I still have a heart for Team Ninja 2, even though I'm really not liking what they did with Ninja Gaiden. I still do love that team and developers. Just that, oh man, I hope Ninja Gaiden 4 is just really impressive and good. Not
Yeah.
what they
Ever
gave us
get
with
a
3.
Ninja Gaiden 4? Because I mean, we can get a musical for Ninja Gaiden, but we can't actually get a better Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that really sucks. But
Mm.
I do love the fact that they did listen to fan feedback with Neo. So that is some hope for them, at least in my opinion. I still do like Team Ninja's works.
Yeah, like even with Itagaki gone, I do think they can still improve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think, and I don't mean to cut you off here, but like I think just like Ren said, with how they've handled Neo and they released multiple demos and were really like listening to fan feedback and actually tweaking the game as they were developing. That just goes to show you that they actually want to win the trust back of fans because obviously they don't have Itagaki for obvious reasons that we won't kind of get into here, but
yeah,
it if you got most of the team that worked on a lot of the games that Itagaki was a part of, and they just kind of are like, okay, like what do you guys want? Guide us through this because we don't want to break any bridges here or burn any bridges here. We want to try to walk a fine straight line and guide us to the right direction, and that's a good thing. Actually, one other Eastern dev I completely forgot to mention, and they kind of fall under the same category as Konami and Capcom, although they are improving a lot more in comparison. Sega. Sega used to do like, last generation, and a little bit of this generation, they were only doing Sonic. And it was just Sonic after Sonic after Sonic. You might have gotten like some other game on the side here or there, but it was just, you didn't get anything else but Sonic. And it was such a problem, and it kind of ruined their reps to the point where, when Shenmue 3 got announced, it was just like, it took this long to get it, and we could have gotten it so much sooner, but had Sega not actually, been high off of Sonic's ass cheeks or whatever, we would have gotten those games. Hell, even like the Yakuza games with like localization, for instance, it took so long just to get 5 to come over to. I think it took like 3 years just to get that game to come over to the West, and by the time we got it, we didn't even get it physically, but at least we got the game, right? But now seeing how they're coming back and they're like, hey, what franchises do you guys want to see come back? We're gonna bring you now. We're gonna bring you things like Yakuza 0, Yakuza Kiwami, and Yakuza 6, all within the span of a year and a half or so. It's just absolutely insane how they've actually started to listen and they want to improve. Whereas like Capcom and Konami just wants to show you how much they could really fuck up everything and just be completely irrelevant to gaming. They'll be fine on other fronts, but gaming, they just want to completely fuck themselves. Capcom, on the other hand, they like to take one step forward and several steps back, where they do one thing right, but they just do so many things in the process completely wrong, and it just doesn't look right for them.
Yeah, I hope that Sega does remaster Shenmue 2 and Shenmue 1 because I really do want to play those games up-resed. I can't find Shenmue 2 like anywhere else that's not cheap unless it's on the Xbox or something, but I do want that copy of like Shenmue 2 in English instead of having to play it on emulator, because right now, I mean, the emulator is pretty much busted as far as playing that game goes. You get glitches, you get crashes, all that. So I would like to see them remaster that before Shenmue 3, but I kind of doubt it. I don't know if they're ever gonna do it, but If that was on the survey, then that is pretty good because they're kind of trying to get people back invested into Sega instead of just doing Sonic, which is the best thing they can do because last generation, I think it got ridiculous. They were doing new episodes for Sonic and they weren't doing too well, so that's another thing. Like, they were just making bad games for that series because people really liked Sonic and they just kept going back to it.
Yeah, they're actually, believe it or not, there is a new Dreamcast emulator that Digital Foundry just talked about in their Shenmue 2 video. That actually allows you to even like graphically enhance the games to some slight degree as well. But also, there's also been talks of, at least when the Kickstarter was up for Shenmue 3, they had mentioned that they've been in talks with Sega to get the rights to the first two games, so that way they can go back and remaster them.
Yeah.
So they have been in talks of doing it. It just needs to be obviously approved and whatnot. And we can go on about Shenmue, but that's not what we're here to talk about. That's a whole nother discussion for another day.
Yeah.
It was a good diverge, though. I mean, it's talking about stuff that companies need to do and how companies fell from grace previously in the past. It sort of shows this indicator of how they are today, which some companies have changed for the better and some companies have changed for the worse. So I can get away with that little divergence there. But we can move on to number 3, of course. I'm going to read this off really quickly. What do you think are some of the problems that Eastern developers need to overcome? Okay, so I would like to go first. I do think that Eastern developers make great games, exceptional. I mean, top of the line, they still do. But what they need to overcome is the fact that their advertising might be not as great in other places like the West. So they tend to try to get tropes to make things work or make games work to appeal to Americans, and sometimes it really doesn't work out in their favor, which is kind of disappointing because I've played a lot of Eastern games that were really great, especially from Platinum, and they just have that problem of not selling well. But I think it also correlates to the game itself because Platinum has fallen into that trap of making games that are short, that might seem rushed out the door. So I do still encourage Eastern developers to make great games, but it's just the advertising that needs to catch on to the West maybe that they could dabble in. So that's what I think about that.
Drew, you want to go? Or
Yeah, I can go next. But yeah, it's pretty much the same as what Ren said. Mainly the advertising. I do think that they need to maybe like get the games out there and have people be aware of them. I mean, Platinum does make some great games, but unless it's not, unless it's a big title like Metal Gear, they don't really sell that well. I mean, we had the first 2 Bayonetta games, which were probably the greatest action games ever made, and they didn't sell too hot.
Yep.
So I do think that's one thing they really do need to improve upon, and also. And also, another thing would be is trying to be unique and not trying to follow the tropes that American games have. I think they should try to appeal to everyone and not appeal to one specific demographic or region in this matter.
Yeah, I will say for that situation, it should be totally gameplay wise. Like if they have a unique style and they want to keep it, they shouldn't just shoehorn what's popular like COD or something else that's big in the market. They should try to be diverse and unique as humanly possible in game design. So they should keep those aesthetics in place. They just need to get their games out to like big developers or big shows like E3. Make sure you show them off, advertise them, pass stuff out. I think that proper advertising will get people invested into those games a lot more than to just say, well, we're going to put out a trailer and sit on it for like 9 months and then we get some poor sales because people really didn't know about the game too much.
Yeah. For me, I think like, yeah, definitely the advertising. I think a big problem that a lot of Eastern games have is that there's a lack of advertising, and it depends on the franchise because some of the franchises do very well depending on how popular they are here.
Yeah.
Other times, not so much. Like, for example, and then we just talked about Sega. Like, Yakuza. The Yakuza games did not do well, from my understanding, in the West. It wasn't until like over time they became more and more popular, kind of like Shenmue, where Shenmue 1 and 2 did not do very well, but they became popular over time.
Also, Dom,
Or now people, yeah.
I don't mean to cut you off, but you're kind of going robot.
Oh, am I? Shit. Hold on, let me. Shit. Let me give you a call really quick and then.
Okay, just a brief intermission.
You know what? Let me close that. Let's leave that. We can figure that out later. Am I fine now?
Talk again?
Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay. You know what? I'll just pull up the document on my phone because, you know, it probably won't make me laugh a lot. So, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, we were talking about Sega and Yakuza. Yeah, those games, you know, they didn't really sell well initially in the West, but over time they grew in popularity and whatnot. And so, you know, a lot of those games could have done better in the advertising department. No, I'm not saying that they should go like way like, you know, overboard with the advertising like Western devs do, where they put more money into the into the advertising as opposed to money into the game development and actual time into the game development. But it is something that I think would honestly help improve those games. Some of the other problems that I think really, you know, kind of had Japanese games suffer over time. The fact that they kind of been following certain Western developer trends and whatnot, and just game trends. You know, whether it be, you know, copying a specific gameplay style, which, you know, Capcom is severely guilty of with the Resident Evil franchise, for example. You know, trying to make it play like Gears of War, and now to the point where it plays like every other first-person horror game. You know, things of that nature, where it's just they look at that and they're like, that's successful in the West, we should copy that. It's like, that's not why people like your games. People want to see stuff that you're gonna make and stuff that we can't get from any other dev but you. And I think that's kind of the problem. You know, so when games try to be a lot more like, you know, Western games and not actually try to be more like, you know, Eastern games, it kind of becomes a problem. I think, you know, for most people, when they think of a Japanese game, they think, let's have like a really goofy and over-the-top type of game, but at the end of the day, it's going to be very entertaining, it's going to be quality, and you can expect a overall good game. Whereas, you know, someone that's, you know, trying to make a game that is not necessarily is meant to be an Eastern game, but takes a lot of things that from Western games, but doesn't do them very well, it kind of falls flat.
Okay, so did drill bit go yet?
Yes.
Just checking. All right. So there was still some robot there, but I mean, I think we can take over the next question until you get it sorted out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what's going on right now. It says I'm live on connection.
It's a little bit weird. But I'll take the next question. So, what do you think are some of the problems that Western developers need to overcome? So, I'm going to go first. I think some of the problems are they tend to be very mediocre in gameplay design at points. This is not for all Western devs, of course. Rockstar tends to do some innovative stuff, but when it comes to Western development, it always is the same thing. Call of Duty, first-person shooters, constantly, over and over and over again. Shooters all over the place. And it seems that they lack the variety compared to the East, where the East has very diverse games no matter where you go. So, I think that personally, for the most part, other studios need to not copy other developers to try to get some fame or success just because it works. I mean, you still should do an innovative game no matter what. I think that personally, if they had this in mind, this mindset, then more of their games would come out to be more varied out of the process. There would be more innovative stuff as opposed to shooters constantly over on the market. So I think they do a good job at advertising. Don't get me wrong; they have all this stuff in the bag. They know what they're doing there. They get their press kits out. They get their developer kits out to people. They give people demos. But they need to overcome this mediocrity, I feel, and also just really step their game up when it comes to making these fun and quirky and diverse games. Don't be afraid to have fun just because a bulk of the market are shooters. It's kind of oversaturated in my opinion. So that's what I think about that. So Mr. Drillbit, you want to go next?
Yeah, I actually fully agree with that. I do think that Western devs do need to take a few more risks rather than just follow where the money is, because there's only so much you can pump into the shooter genre before people just get sick of it and move on to the next big thing. I mean, it even shows with like the newer COD games, which are pretty much dropping in sales really fast. So the audience there is just either leaving or it's just completely dying off. I mean, you see other shooters like Overwatch thrive because it actually tries to change up the formula and maybe bring in some and it doesn't. And the thing with Overwatch is it's not like the other first-person shooters. It has a colorful cast, and at least there's a wide variety of characters that don't exactly all play the same. So I think that the one big thing Western devs need to do is just branch out more. Maybe not be afraid of having games sell low, you know, try to at least put in more advertising towards it and make people interested, not follow the crowd. We've had lots of indie studios do that where they try to make something new, unique, and there are times where it does become a big success. So I think that Western devs should try to not, try to avoid the industry from becoming stagnated so that they can be able to bring in more variety in the games. At least that's my opinion.
Alrighty, so after that weird intermission of bullshit, so what do I think of Western devs? One thing that, and I think Ren, you were saying this too a little bit when I was able to catch it at least, is that the Western devs generally just make the same thing. Everyone tries to make the same sort of type of game. If they're not making a third person or first person shooter, they're always making like other things like the same type of walking simulator or same type of first person horror game, and it all just kind of feels dull and boring. When I look at like Japanese games, and there's a lot of weird ones and a lot of interesting ones, some of which that don't even get localized, which is really unfortunate. But when I look at those, I always just feel like everything kind of feels different, even if they're sort of like the same type of genre per se, because they all just do something that is like outlandish and weird and crazy, and I like that. Whereas like if I go to a Western dev, I kind of just already know what to expect. Everything kind of just plays the same, and I kind of know where things are going. Not all the time. Some games kind of catch me off guard, but I feel like that's the general like trend for Western game developers and Western games.
Yeah, like it just seems like when it comes to variety's sake, it's a lot of shooters out there. Like, I mean, some of them can be good, some of them can be bad, but it doesn't change the fact that there are so many of them that they tend to just kill the variety on the Western side. So they got the advertising down, but when it comes to the variety, it kills it.
Yeah, I mean, like we throw in way too much advertising here in the West as far as like games are concerned. Sometimes more so than what the actual game gets as far as like development is concerned, and it's kind of saddening when you can see all that money go to the game's development and it could improve the quality of the game, but it goes more into advertising.
Yeah, I will argue though that it does give that game attention enough to the point where maybe people will be invested to buy the game because it'll make the game sell well.
That is true, but other than that, like like you said, if it's not really a shooter, this is a new trend here in the Western market. walking simulators and first-person run and hide simulators. Those are the big two that are kind of cropping up, and everyone's trying to make their own iterations. So much so to the point that we got other Eastern developers trying to copy them. Hello Capcom.
Please don't make a walking sim. That's just garbage. Like, play Firewatch, you'll be bored.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of my biggest problems with like at least modern Western game developers and games is that like if that's all we're getting is if it's not a shooter and if it's not a walking sim, then why am I going to be interested? And when I see that shit kind of bleed through on Japanese games, it's just like, well, fuck. Now the variety is killed, and I don't really look forward to anything that I that's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever a game like something like Neo or something ridiculously hard comes out, I feel more interested in it because it kind of harkens back to games back in the day where they were much harder, didn't really handhold, and were more intricate and well thought out.
Drillbit, you were about to say something?
But yeah, I do agree on that. Walking simulators really don't offer much, and they feel a lot more linear than, let's say, like the Telltale games, because at least those give you some form of choice while you're just walking towards a linear path and just seeing the story unfold. But even then, it's hard to call walking simulators a game when there's barely any interaction in it. At
Yeah.
least in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree. And to kind of add on to your point, I really don't like when people like to use the excuse that if it's in first person, it's immersive. Also, something that Capcom just said recently too, but I digress.
No, I mean, the immersion has to come from one of the core features of the game, which is the game itself. If there's
Yeah.
literally no gameplay, then it's nothing to make the player invested. You're just walking from point A to point B. You might be discovering a story, but you're not necessarily doing a lot for gameplay standards, which is having fun with it. So I can see a lot of people saying this is boring, so it turns me off. And
Yeah.
that's the kind of vibe that I get from walking simulators.
Yeah, like there's really no sense of reward if it's all just handed to you.
So that's something that Western devs need to fix. They really need to break that trope and make their games a lot more interesting because eventually, I mean, if the East had those advertising skills, they would pretty much mop the floor with them as far as video game creation is concerned. I mean, they have a lot more variety and ideas. So we're going to move on to the next question. Drillbit, could you read that off, please?
There is an article by GameDesigning.org that claimed there's a clear difference in design between East and West with colorful, abstract art styles that tends to capture something lively to the Japanese. In an interview with Kenji Inafune, he claimed that this style sells more in the East because so many people grew up with Japanese anime, yet the West prefers more gritty realism and rugged characters. Natural everyman who saves the girls and wields guns galore. How do you feel about this statement? And do you personally judge on characters, art style, or story to see if it's relatable to you before you play a game based on your preferences alone? Well, in my opinion, I guess art style is kind of a big thing since that is what creates the atmosphere. I mean, if a game is very dull looking and gray, then it's not going to interest me as much. I mean, you had games like Ukami, which had kind of like that was kind of like the watercolored painting sort of way, and that kind of what drew you into the world. But the gameplay was also really good as well. I do think that gameplay is really the most important thing, but art style can help contribute to it. At least that's why it appeals to me a lot more compared to the Western devs who prefer to keep everything ultra realistic and it ends up just looking dull. And there's not really that much color in it, which ends up kind of making it get lost in the sea of the other Western games that try to be realistic.
Yeah, like I think the realistic style, while in certain games I do find it enjoyable, like Uncharted 4 for instance, where like there's a lot of vibrant and lush background with some of the palettes that they have, some of the scenery, some of the foliage, but it's not a style that is as diverse as something that you would see that's otherworldly or perhaps abstract. The colors really look great alongside the gameplay. And it's been done to death as well when it comes to a realistic format. I mean, we see games like Uncharted 4 do it, Gears, Last of Us. You know, it's just a continuing style that really is wearing down. I would rather see something that I never seen before graphically as opposed to something that's, well, generic human male here, generic brown texture here. So I do think that personally, maybe they should branch out and try other styles. I think it influences me to play a game that's something that I never quite seen before. That's why I really like Death Stranding, because while it's doing this realistic character bit, it's doing something that's completely different in terms of art style and how things cooperate in that world. And you know, you see dead sea life all over the place on tanks and stuff like that. It's so crazy that you just want to know more and analyze more. And there's not a lot of games in the American audience that tends to do that a lot that looks realistic to me. So I think that if they follow some trends and maybe take some inspiration from the Japanese, then maybe that would enhance their art style as well. But I got to give it to the Japanese here when it comes to great abstract art. It's done amazingly.
I want to just kind of add on to your point with like Death Stranding. That game in particular, like I think what works well with it is just the fact that like they're using, you know, the dull like colors and whatnot alongside with like the feel of the game per se.
Yeah.
And just like everything around it, where everything just kind of looks lifeless, but they're doing it intentionally. Whereas like, you know, say for instance, you know, let's just pull Devil May Cry 2 for example, where everything but Dante looks so dull and not very colorful, and it's just like I'm not really interested in what's going on around me. Nothing looks very, you know, interesting or stands out. It's just dull and depressing looking. It's not good. Whereas like Death Stranding, it's just like, okay, well, everything's dying. Like what is the whole story behind everything? You know, it's like it kind of draws you in. It's kind of the opposite effect with that game. But looking at like Japanese games in particular, I think the thing that I really like about them is that they know how to draw like a certain like style per se, like various different colors make it look, you know, very vibrant and whatnot. Whereas like like most Western games, they're like, yeah, let's not make everything colorful. Let's make it all look like a war zone and look very bland and boring. I wouldn't say that applies to games back in the early 2000s for Western devs, but it definitely applies now. If we saw more stuff that was like very colorful and whatnot, I think that could very well change some things for the Western audience. Or unless if they, you know, again, like do something different, like Death Stranding, where, you know, they play along with what the dull colors are, you know, that dull color palette that they have going on, where it has some kind of importance there. That's not what you really see with Western devs. Also,
Yeah.
I do want to say really quick, as far as one particular other Japanese game that I'm aware of that has sort of a dual color palette, but it kind of works based on its style, is the original Samurai Warriors. You know, I know it's a Musou game and not everybody really likes those, but the first one, which was developed partially by EA, you know, it has like this kind of like old school samurai like film grain type of look. So it kind of looks like the colors are kind of desaturated, but it honestly kind of works for the style that they were going for in that game. So in some cases like that, I don't mind it per se, but in most cases, I would like to see various different colors, or like if you can get like a specific color to like pop out in a very dull room or something like that. Stuff like that would actually make a huge difference. It's the little things that count.
Yeah, if it's something that we seen done before, but it's never been done before in that style or format, then definitely it stands out a lot more than something you would see on the market. Like if it's a cover art of a guy just holding a gun, that doesn't tell me much other than the fact that it might be a generic shooter. But if there's something more to the game, something more to the trailers that I'm not seeing, I'm obviously going to be interested to try it out, regardless of what it is. It could be either, an anime chick kicking like a cat in space or something. If it looks good, I'm going to play it, obviously. So I think people really need to take style and art into account when it comes to making games like that.
Mm.
So we're going to move on to the next question. Let's talk a little bit about controls. What region do you think makes the best controls for their games, East or West? So, my opinion on this is going to be very short. I think that the East is improving when it comes to controls because, let's be honest, back in the day, a lot of their controls were either inverted or just weirdly map buttons, stuff like this that really didn't apply well when you go back and play it today. The West, they obviously got the control scheme down pat fast. The East is catching up, though. Their games are starting to feel really good to play. But the West just sort of had that control scheme, in my opinion, that really was good, simple. It wasn't like mapped with multiple buttons where the control scheme became convoluted, like Resident Evil 6, for example. So I would give it to the West here in terms of controls. I think that so far I had no problem with their controls or shooters or any issues with playing their games with the way they map their buttons.
For me, I think I'm kind of 50-50 on this because I like a lot of Japanese games, so I was actually used to a lot of the controls. Although I do agree, I'm not a big fan of like stuff that's like inverted and whatnot.
Yeah.
The footage that I think is going to be used for this particular discussion, I played a little bit of Tenchu Wrath of Heaven, and that game, literally, when you're turning the camera left to right, it's inverted. So if you're turning the analog stick to the left, it's going to turn the camera right, and vice versa. So, and this is still kind of prevalent in other Japanese games. Like, you can go download the Yakuza 6 demo right now, and they do that shit still. And I'm just like, if I could change that, I would. And that's something that personally I've never understood how that makes sense. I don't know why that would be. If I hit left, I should be going left, not the other way around. I think that is kind of common sense. The other thing that I really like about Japanese devs, and I don't know how long they've been doing this, and it's not often been done. I haven't seen it all too much, whether it be Japanese or Western, fully customizable controls.
Yes.
Being able to just go in and change each individual button layout. That is something that I just like in general. It's a good thing to have, to just be able to customize your controls to however you prefer, because at that point, like a good example of this would be like Devil May Cry 4, for example. Like, you can fully customize those controls, and to some people, that's the best way to play. I mean, even the developers say that they actually customize the controls because they're not able to do certain moves and inputs because they just feel like the game doesn't suit well. They make the default controls and it suits well for casuals and whatnot, or for people who are just really familiar and comfortable with those controls. But then for people who want to just do like really crazy high level stuff, they can fully customize the controls and have like the most ridiculous setup, but if they feel like that works, that works. And I really like that philosophy.
Yeah, customizable controls should be the wave of the future. I mean, it's the best. I know that East and West, both of them have done it, but not to the degree that every game has it. And I think that's sort of the underlying nature of them not fully utilizing this for the gamer. I think that for the most part, customizable controls are the best. But again, the inverted stuff, it kind of pisses me off because it was like you were saying earlier, if I'm going left, I should go left, not right. So that's the type of stuff that I want to see avoided in the future for Eastern games because they tend to do it a lot more than Western, in my opinion. So what do you feel about this drill bit?
But yeah, I fully agree. Customizable controls should be a norm from now on. I mean, I know that most fighting games and even action games do it, but they should allow. But most games should allow you to play the way you want and what you're comfortable with. Like some people prefer to shoot with the face button, with the shoulder buttons rather than the back buttons, or maybe they're used to a particular control scheme that they've been using their whole life. And also I would agree with the camera because after playing certain games for so long, you get used to a certain camera scheme, and then once it starts changing up, then it kind of screws you up. But yeah, not really much to add, but that's my opinion.
I think we should move on to the next one,
I'll
which
take it because I haven't read.
okay, go ahead.
How do you feel about storyline aspects and narratives that Western and Eastern games produce? Which style is your favorite? This is a tough one.
It is,
Actually,
yeah.
not really. Not
Well,
really.
for me, it is. Well, now I can see the simplicity of it. So,
Yeah, for me, like I said, I prefer Japanese games, so I just kind of I prefer the storytelling in those games, but as far as like what aspects of them, that I think that's what's the tough part, because it's like I really like when in they really have like a well thought out plot and just kind of go in like really long depth, and they'll have like backstories and things of that nature that you can read through like game notes and whatnot, and it's really like well thought out. But then there are other times where it's just not so well thought out. But I've never really come across that too much with Japanese games. Sometimes it depends on the game. I think that's more akin to like more modern Japanese games, of course. But like, if I don't know, like I kind of just prefer the more like over the top narratives that can be serious, but like to be like goofy and silly and whatnot, like kind of like Devil May Cry 3, for example, where it's only serious when it needs to be. I kind of like that. Whereas like Western games, they kind of just at least now they're more like it needs to be serious and like gritty and whatnot. It can never really like have fun with itself. I think that's kind of like the key thing that I like about Eastern games is that it knows when to have fun with itself, and then it knows when to like that when to be serious per se.
yeah, yeah. I have to agree. I think that for the most part, to add on to the point, for Western games, it seems to be more Hollywood like, more movie inspired than anything. I mean, the Eastern developers, they do have this in mind sometimes, but it's very prevalent in the Western studios where they take influences from movies or inspirations from there. People being super serious, stuff being super grimdark, not having enough fun or playfulness to it. So I think that personally, yeah, I can see that point of the Western developers sort of having this issue where they don't go too much into depth with something because of the stylistic choice with trying to be too Hollywood or trying to have a big budget. This does not work all the time. Again, I'm going to use this as another excuse, but when RE6 tried to go like Hollywood big time, over the top, but still serious, it didn't work out too well because the stuff we were doing didn't blend in too well with how the tone was taking itself. I guess you could say RE5 was like this to an extent, but I had fun with that game. I had fun with that story. So I think that personally, for the most part, Eastern developers, they have a lot of fun. They bring in concepts that are absolutely just crazy because they bring in a lot of Japanese culture. This is prevalent with Silent Hill 2, where there's some stuff going on with like their Japanese lore. going into this game, and you don't notice it. You really don't notice it because you're so engrossed into the story. And I think Japanese developers has like a good story by doing stuff like that because you just don't know, and it's weird, but it's new to us. So I like when they put in things that are very unexpected and is very like in depth with their culture, like kids getting stuck in toilets. They apply that to some of the stuff that's going on in Silent Hill with the imagery. We don't see influences like this like a lot from Western developers.
Hmm.
And I think if they did have fun, if they just took a step back and not taking all their IPs and work seriously, I think they could have a lot of fun with what they're doing. Maybe incorporate that into the gameplay. I mean, you won't see a game as ridiculous, probably Western wise, as like God Hand or something where you're kicking people in space. It's just uncommon. So yeah, I mean, I do think they need to lighten up the mood, but some of the stories I've seen from the Western developers, I mean, they haven't been slouches for Hollywood's sake. They just haven't been very original from what I can say. So, Mr. Drillbit, you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, for the most part, I do agree that Western devs do try to go with the big budget Hollywood narrative. So so like I said before, it is playing it safe because that is what the mainstream prefers,
Yeah.
and that's kind of staying in the middle ground. Though with Japanese devs, you do see them going into sometimes more mature themes and even like such as games with like Silent Hill and even Fatal Frame, which they were dealing with death and other things as well. I do really think that Silent Hill 2 is probably a great example of it because of how much it goes in depth with its atmosphere and even how it deals with certain psychological issues that not many Western devs have really gone in depth with. So it does allow their narratives to be far more expansive rather than being kind of linear and straightforward like the Western devs have been doing. Though I do think there is still room for improvement. But for the most part, I will say that Japanese devs probably have the narrative locked down for the most part.
Yeah.
Granted, there's a few faults here and there, but that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, like if we're talking about faults, I would say there are times in Eastern literature or Eastern video game stories where things get too weird. Namely, some stuff in Metal Gear. I know that Kojima, he tends to make some really serious moments when they need to be, but then there's moments where it's like so out of place, and it's like, did they really just do that? You know what I mean? That's what you're thinking. But it's all in good fun. It's just sometimes where it goes a little bit too far in certain games. But I guess if you played them for a long time, you have an affinity for that stylistic sort of manner of how they tell stories. But yeah, they do need room for improvement. I think that what the Western devs need to do is they need to realize that you don't really need bundles and bundles and bundles of money to create a good story. All you need is a really good writer, get that person in there and have a little fun with it. Don't make it too serious in tone. Otherwise, I think it might bring down the game in terms of mechanics.
Yeah, and to add on to that point, I would also say like don't try to copy off of Western devs. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of the big problem too, is that because they try to be like Western devs, it just kind of comes off. Actually, it doesn't kind of. It does come off really flat in most cases.
Yeah, and in a way, it does kind of lose their identity.
Yeah, it's like, there's these guys, they're known for their quirky moments and making storytelling, and then they take from the Western devs, and it just doesn't come out too appealing, which is the problem with them. They're taking problems from them and they're incorporating them into their own games, like DMC, Devil May Cry, of course, for people who don't know what that is. That game was not as compelling when Kenji Inafune made that move to say, oh, we need more talent for this game right here, so
We need
Yeah.
to westernize our games, which turned out to be a clusterfuck because we got things like DMC Devil May Cry, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, and then the last game, which was Remember Me, which I hear Remember Me was actually all right, and compared to the other two games,
Mhm.
and apparently had a sequel written already, but it just needs to be approved by Capcom. So I don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, it just when you have things like that, it's not a good idea. And then when you have some of those Capcom devs or like any other dev that worked on those projects, and those projects don't turn out well, and you make them work on bigger projects, and those also don't turn out
Yeah.
well. It just doesn't make sense why you would want to continue working with those people instead of the people that could actually make some quality games and bring you a lot of money in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a good point of that is like I think like what Nintendo did in the 2000s, like having an American studio work on a new Metroid game, and it did actually breathe in a lot of new life in the series with the Metroid Prime games. But the thing is that they were constantly supervising the game and making sure that it came out the way they wanted to, while letting them work on it as well. So I think the problem with like Capcom and DMC and even Dead Rising 4 is that they kind of gave them too much freedom and didn't exactly and kind of made it lose its own identity instead of actually keeping true to the series.
Yes, because once you give too much freedom, then a person might feel obligated to get lazy or not do as well as they should be doing or slack off. I mean, there's a number of factors as to why some of these stories fail, and I think that's just a prime example. So, I think we can move on to the next question. So, Mr. Drillbit, could you read that off, please?
For the final question, it was claimed once again by GameDesigning.org that more Americans prefer open world games and choice, more freedom like Deus Ex over linear titles like the East produces. While Japanese gamers prefer a lot more vibrant, skill-based structure over modern AAA shooters that the West produces, that apparently doesn't catch on in the East. It's been stated that each region should take influences from each other to improve with sales and bring more variety to the table. Do you believe this statement could be beneficial to either region, and why? I Hmm. Well, to add on to that, I do think that it really depends on the game. Some games that are more story driven would probably work better as a linear style game compared to open world games, which aren't so much focused on story but letting you explore the game and trying to explore a vast open world. I mean, at this point, I feel like open world is getting shooed in a lot without exactly doing anything with it. Mainly play games like Assassin's Creed and even Watch Dogs and stuff, because there's no point in having a big open world if there's nothing to explore. I mean, there were certain games like No More Heroes, which was open world, but there was nothing to do in it. So with the second game, they made it more linear and streamlined, which ended up helping benefit the game. So in terms of having taking stuff from each region, I do think that Easter devs could start making more open world games, but they do need to add in a lot more variety towards it and actually make exploration feel like it means something. Like instead of just being a chore, being going from point A to point B. While Western devs could maybe take a more linear route in say, but also try to keep the story more focused and maybe putting more works towards the core gameplay at least.
Yeah, I agree that Western devs should do that because if you make an open world game, you're expected to, give it some life, give it some variety. If there's nothing to do, then the only thing driving it is other mechanics. So the problem that they face with stuff like that is that are they going to make a compelling game that people could run around in and do whatever they feel like, or are they going to bog it down for something else? I think that maybe they should take the approach and meld it together. You can have an open world with a good story, and have some bustle to it, some hustle and bustle. That would be the best way to make certain open world games better. As for Western games, I think what they need to do is just make an unorthodox, cool story that's like very good. Maybe put in some wide linearity in between, because I mean Uncharted 4 did this where it's like it's a linear game but it's so open that you can just practically think you're going anywhere like an open world game, but it's really not. You do have a point A to point B path, and I think that maybe the Eastern developers could take from that as well. So I do think when it comes to this, they can change some influences. Like I said, take some influences and put it into their certain games. But it's all about improvement, and I haven't been seeing that lately. Like I've been seeing a lot of open world titles, like what is it, Ghost Recon Wildlands. Yeah, that's doing open world. Other stuff, I'm pretty sure the next AC game is gonna do it, of course, no doubt. So it's just getting really shoehorned in, like Drillbit said. And they really need to take advantage of other things you can do to make that genre interesting. So I do think that is getting to a point where it's becoming oversaturated. But Eastern, they do well with linear games. They just need, to keep improving. So it's nothing wrong with improvement on both sides.
Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, I think that yeah, just like you said, there could be improvement on both sides. I For me, open world, since we kind of discussed that a little bit, it is it's a cool feature, no doubt. But the problem that and I like to use this as an example a lot, Metal Gear Solid 5, like games like that, they have it, and I apologize if you hear a dog barking in the background, but really cool idea, right? But the problem is that like you don't have any threats around the world. You don't have anything really to do. It's just kind of barren wasteland, or just generic. Hey, I just drive down the street. There's no real like shops or goodies that I can get and interact with like the world. It's just kind of more like, here's an open world because we could have it, because we can do it, and not really because there's a lot that you can do. There's a lot of side content that you can take care of and things of that nature. Actually, a good example of what they could do is maybe not necessarily make a open world, but maybe more like an open section per se. And an example of that would be like, if we're just using like Metal Gear Solid 5 as an example, instead of having that whole open map, just make the bases more open and accessible as to what you can do and what ways you can tackle your mission that way. That way, if you wanted to tackle it from one end of the base instead of the other, you could do it that way if you so choose to do it that way. Another example of this would be, and a more appropriate example, the Yakuza series. They have city sections that you go through, and they're not open world, but they're open city, I guess you can say, where you go throughout the entire city, and they have like these little shops and things that you can go through, and little side quests that you can do and things of that nature. And there's so much to do in just one small location. So it's things like that, I think, that could really benefit like open world stuff on both ends, where like a game like Watch Dogs, really big open world, not much to do, really boring and whatnot. Brandon got in here at the very end of the discussion, like a pig. But yeah, really nothing to do in that game. But then you got something like Yakuza, where it's smaller, very open, and you can do a lot of things in that small jam-packed area. And maybe something like that would work, where it's not necessarily open world, but it's not necessarily linear either. You can kind of tackle anything in any particular way you want to, but also not necessarily go throughout a barren wasteland where there's nothing to do. As far as like bringing more variety to the table, yeah, I think, but I wouldn't necessarily say that with Japanese developers. I just think that localization is their biggest problem, because there's a lot of things that need to be localized that don't. But with Western devs, yes, I'm kind of tired of seeing shooters, walking sims, run and hide sims, and not really much to add there. I mean, that's all we really get. If we get other things, I don't know about it, because quite frankly, the thing that sadly overshadows it is shooters and all these other things that we've been getting constantly, and open world games, which is kind of been I can't speak today, has been pretty much oversaturating our Western market here.
Yeah, I just think that when it comes to choice and diversity, I mean, of course, games can still have that, whether they're, Eastern or Western, but at the same time, I think that both has pros and cons, and they need to take what is the pros and take those and implement those into their games, and take the cons and throw them out. So stuff like no localization on certain games, throw that out. Get a localization team. Make games faster because there are Americans in the West that want your titles. So that's that problem out of the way. For open world games, I mean, you don't have to make it necessarily open like I was saying earlier. You can make it like wide linear where it's just big, but there's still like a point A to point B, still a lot of stuff going down in each section, so you can make a game like that. That would eliminate the problem of even making an open world game for some people, because I know some people try to aim for big goals and they don't end up accomplishing them. So,
curious question. I don't mean to interject, but what do you think about the idea that I suggested, where it's not necessarily kind of like the Yakuza games, where it's not necessarily open world, but it's not necessarily linear either. It's
so like a middle ground?
Yeah, it's a very, it would be small in the sense that it's very small, like a linear thing, but big in the sense that there's a lot to do in such a small, jam-packed area.
That could work. I mean, like I said, it sort of kills the vibe of someone trying to aim for an open world game, and they just tend to either not have enough stuff to do or focus on the story. So bringing down the scale, that could work as well. If you have a lot going on, then I think that's just going to add to the replay value. So that's what I think about that.
Yeah, I do think it's much easier to have like a smaller type area and just put in a lot than having a huge open world and not having really that much to do. Yep. I do think it's mainly just cutting out the fat of the open world type of game, and at least making it a lot more, I guess, making it a lot more streamlined and compacted in a way.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think that was a great question to end off on. So we're going to get to these bonus questions, which Mr. Brando could be a part of. So we have two of them here. I'm going to read off number one. How do you feel about Eastern and Western game development, primarily how the PlayStation and Xbox is progressing? This is very easy for me. The Xbox is doing shit in Japan. Sucks in Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Xbox sucks in Japan. Very bad.
Yeah, it's sad too, because I feel like the original Xbox had a lot of variety in terms of Japanese games. You had like Koei Tecmo supporting it. Sega had a lot of great titles on it, like Shenmue 2 and the Panzer Dragoon, and even like Jet Set Radio. And hell, let's not forget about Ninja Gaiden as well. Microsoft did try to push out a lot of Japanese-made games for the 360 and its early start of the life, but as soon as they weren't seeing sales, they just backed out of it, and most of those devs just moved to PlayStation.
Yeah, that's the problem. Like, Microsoft, they try their best to appeal to the Japanese market, but when those ideas go south, they always do something stupid that messes it up. Like, I remember there was one point during the DRM fiasco that they said they didn't want indie games on their platform anymore. That counted all types of indie games, so that could range, Japanese indie games. They don't want them on their title. So I remember they had that in play, and when they did that, they cut off a feature for developers to get on their system and make games for their system. So I think that sometimes the American developers, or namely the Xbox people, they tend to make dumb decisions, and then they come back. Phil Spencer is the best thing that happened to them, so, that's just is what it is. The PlayStation just tends to be better in terms of, like, PR and doing game development for certain developers.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Japan has never really had, like, a huge support for the Xbox, just because, not a lot of Japanese gamers buy it, and not many Japanese developers develop for it. And it's kind of unfortunate, but at the same time, the few games that do get made for any iteration of the Xbox that are in Japan apparently they get some pretty kick-ass games that we don't even get, which is kind of sad that we can't get some of those games. But I hear that some of the games on the 360 are region-free. Some of them, not all of them, because the Xbox 360 is not region-free.
Yeah.
But as far as the PlayStation is concerned, I mean, like, you know, it is a console that will pretty much always get support from Japanese developers. It's always going to get, you know, like RPGs and whatnot and things of that nature. So I think really it just kind of more of like you know, yeah, there are those Western devs that support it, but you know, it's only I feel like to an extent, like it's kind of been like it depends on what game it is, and it has been a little bit hit or miss depending on the game and console, of course. But overall, I think it's been better. It's been better than some years.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, I think that just the support on PlayStation is better in terms of certain games. I believe, is the Xbox One region free or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good. So yeah, they're doing stuff like that where, you know, you can import and play games wherever. So I think that is good for them to have on their side. They're slowly improving, but they still have the competition edge them out in some degree. So Brandon, how do you feel about this topic?
Right. What was the question again? I kind of lost the question when you were talking. Sorry.
It's about, you know, your favorite person in either PlayStation or Xbox in terms of game development. Who do you think's better?
It was better in terms of game development. I gotta go with Sony because they have more variety for my taste. Yeah, Microsoft do have some good games like Halo. Yeah, those games are great before Halo 4 came out. Theirs is okay. It's not, in my opinion, the greatest shooter out there like people claim to be, but you know, so being Crackdown is probably one of my favorite, hands down, Xbox 360 exclusive game they had. I can't talk. But Sony like nailed it with Infamous, God of War, Killzone, Little Big Planet, and a number of other games. That's not even including third-party titles.
Oh yeah,
like
there's a lot of
series.
There's a lot of third party. Like someone said, you know, they said it best. Sony has great third party support, whereas Microsoft, you know, they are dropping the ball a bit on their exclusives. They have multiplayer, sure, but it's really not enough to edge out the competition, in my opinion.
Yeah,
it's
like
just multiplayer. I mean, you could get like exclusive third, second, and first party on the PlayStation side, whereas Microsoft side is rare.
Yeah, it's rare, and you can get that stuff on PC.
Yeah, like lately the Japanese devs have been moving a lot to PC, mainly because it's so easy to port over there, and because it's a lot. From what I've heard, that Microsoft does have some kind of limit in terms of how many copies it has to be published for the Xbox. So maybe that's one reason why it's scary.
Not only that, it makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
But Microsoft, they do have a lot of rules, and which is ridiculous. Like, I'm not sure you guys remember the old indie rule. If you're going to publish your game on our platform, it has to be at the same time or first before the competition. And that screwed up a lot of people.
Yeah.
Spencer tried to damage control it, but of course it didn't work. So I think they backtracked over that statement or claim, whatever. And you don't see a lot of indies on Xbox like you normally would, unless it comes out some point afterwards or at the same time.
Yeah, I was saying that earlier. They have some weird policy against indies, which cuts off a section of their developers.
Yeah.
Oh wait, I just remember something. Their patches can't be more than I think 50 megabytes or something. Skullgirls, for example, they
wasn't
could.
that for, like only for 360 though? Because
360, that was one thing I remember because the Skullgirls, the Xbox version, couldn't get updated for a long time because of that rule.
Oh yeah, it's starting to make sense now. Yeah, because there's a lot of Xbox games that weren't even fixed.
Yeah, Silent Hill in particular.
Yeah.
On the Enders. Yeah, so you cannot have a big patch though. Where Sony though, you could like have the biggest patch in the world to fix your game.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. They need to drop some of those rules. So I'm going to move on to the next one.
Oh, you don't have the doc? I'll take it then.
Yeah, just read it for me, please.
Bonus question number 2: has there been Americanized content that the Japanese drew inspiration from that you actually enjoyed? I have no.
Repeat that, please.
Has there been Americanized content that the Japanese drew inspiration from that you actually enjoyed? And I have no answer for that one.
Vanquish, because that game is like so Western, and it was made by Platinum Games. That is a great game. Anarchy Reigns is another one. Mad World.
Oh yeah. Yeah, as I recall, like I believe that games like Bayonetta took a lot of Western inspiration, especially if you like listen to the soundtrack. I think one of the
Devil May Cry.
Yeah.
A lot of games took inspiration from the Western world.
Hold on, let Joel finish.
Yeah, also Silent Hill, like the first few Silent Hill games took inspiration from like horror novelists like Stephen King, and even there's even references to like horror directors like John Carpenter, which I thought was kind of neat. Apparently, like the thing is that Konami actually made that game to appeal to a more Western type audience, so it was neat that they at least tried to keep it unique, and while also paying homage to a lot of like Western type directors and authors. Well, that's all I really have to say.
Alrighty, so unless if Ren isn't going to have dogs barking, do you have anything to say on this matter, or are we good to end?
Look, I can't control these little furry motherfuckers.
Actually, Ren and Dom, can one of you guys read off a few questions for me real quick? Because they came here really late, so I kind of want to like get my piece on some questions.
Do you have the dog?
No, I don't. I don't have it up. I don't know where it is actually.
I'll put it in chat and see if you can get it. Also, what was this question? This was bonus question number 2.
Yeah.
Has Americanized content that the Japanese drew inspiration from that you actually enjoyed? There's a few. I don't think I can recall some off the top of my head, but I do think that for the most part, like some of those third-person shooters, like sci-fi elements that Vanquish pretty much is a good example of how I really enjoy the fast and kinetic action that sci-fi games tend to do. Also, some of the third-person shooters, two guns going around, shooting people in these seedy underbellies, maybe some story elements like being a detective or something like that. I remember Metal Gear Solid 3, they drew some inspiration from James Bond, I think. That was pretty cool to see, too.
No, they, I don't know if they did, but
or they made jokes to it, yeah.
They referenced it a lot.
Cause the music sounds very James Bond-esque, it sounds just something like a secret agent or something like that. So,
I remember Major Zero mentions that he's a big fan of James Bond, and Snake doesn't like James Bond.
Snake doesn't like him, yeah.
Yeah, because of the fact that he feels as though that's not what real spies are about.
Mm-hmm.
Because he is a spy.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. But Brandon, the document is in the chat.
Yeah, I'm open.
Ooh, that lag spike.
Give me. Oh, voice lag.
A little bit.
Yeah, I'm opening up the page. Part that's why. Make it load a little faster. Jesus, fuck, come on, a little faster. There we go. Okay, I'll answer number 2. Western Video Game Studios. Okay, I will say start with the Western. The Western, it varies from some of the Rockstar Studios. Like the ones that made GTA or Red Dead. Like those guys know how you make an open world game and know how to make it last in terms of replay value. And what else? I would say Santa Monica Studios, the developers for the God of War games. God of War fan. I love the action got for them. So that's another one. Can't think of many. Maybe was it BioWare that makes the Mass Effect games?
Yeah, BioWare, I think.
Yeah, they have a hit and miss history though, but overall they're a pretty good developing team despite working for EA. But that's a different story. All right, to move on for the Eastern side, I would definitely say Platinum Games because they made quite a few of games that I highly would recommend. Mercury Reigns, Bayonetta, Vanquish, and so forth. Of course, they made a lot of flops like Star Fox, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We never will speak of that. And that's it from the top of my head. So I'll move on to the next one. Here we go. What do you think of some of the problems that Eastern developers need to overcome? They need to, I think, push their games more for its sell big numbers. Because the one problem that Eastern games face, if it's not a well-known title that was like years ago, like Castlevania, Devil May Cry, or anything else like that, it won't sell today. As far as we can see. So they gotta do better pushing their stuff, and also not to westernize their games like the what Capcom tried to do under KJ because you know how well that turned out. And that's kind of it as far as I'm concerned, top of my head. One, what problems that Western developers need to overcome? They need to diverse the industry. Dewey, though, we see a number of influx of shooters or highly action-based shooters. Some of them are good, some are mediocre at best. So that's one thing that Western developers need to do. What else can you do?
You want to take one more before we wrap up?
I'll take one more. Don't worry. KJ Influence had claimed that this style sells more in the East because so many people grow up with Japanese anime. It gets them prefers more premium realism around characters. I'm not sure what to think on this one. I guess he's right, maybe, because it varies from people to people, or it varies from east to west. Because like myself, I grew up with more like characters like Dante, for example. So I don't know where KG's going with this one though. Like, if he means we gotta like westernize the side to appeal more to the west or something, and I don't agree with that because it's taking away the diversity that both sides carry. So I'm not really getting this one. And I think I'm done.
All right.
Ren?
There we go. I'm sorry, because I know Ren wanted me to take care of the ending, so or unless if you are able to do it, Ren.
Yeah, it's time to do those outros. I think we're done for the most part. Great discussion, as usual. Gotta edit some stuff out, but you know how that is. So I'm gonna start with Mr. Brandon since he came late. He'll be the first to do his outro. So Brandon, do your outro, please.
Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Archimagic 504. Same old.
Mr. Dom.
You can find me as biodevil_Dom on Twitter and on YouTube, and then on Twitch it's Dom241996. Got 2 videos that I'm procrastinating on. Well, actually 3 if you count my RE6 video, but I want to get that stuff done, but work has been a pain in my ass lately.
Mr. Drillbit?
You can find me on Twitter as Drillbit777.
And you can find me on Twitter at @renoperative_. You can find me on YouTube at Renegade Operative. I will be uploading this podcast shortly, along with all the other stuff that we have to do over the next 2 days. Then it's going to be Christmas break, so we're going to be doing a lot of gameplay stuff. I did a video on RE7 not too long ago, first impressions. That's going to be up pretty soon. Hopefully people love it, because I have a lot of things to say about that game. So, this is Renegade Operative signing off of this Rebellion's Edge podcast. Hopefully you look forward to the next one, because I think we're going to be talking about Ratchet and Clank versus Jack. So that's going to be the next one.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm going to get James on for that. So, this is us signing off. Ratchet and Clank and Jack.
Oh yeah.
Jack and Daxter.
Yeah. Gonna stack those games up against each other and see what's more fun. But until then, this is the TCP podcast signing off. Hopefully you had a fun time on this Rebellion's Edge podcast. See you later.
See ya.
Bye.
Go get high or something with Snoop Dogg. I don't know.
Come on, do better than that.
Dogs suck.